It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the remorseless Robert Begley. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably Robert Begley. How you doing this afternoon, Robert?
I'm doing great, Andy. Ready to soar through the clouds in today's episode.
Well, the clouds are going to be filled with the smell of gasoline, in that case,
that's,
as Henry Drummond says in Inherit the Wind. But that's
that's
not our
right.
topic for today, right? We are going to soar, with one of the great aviatrix. I love that word of history. So,
Yes.
Robert, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
Yeah, sure. So before, Andy, you and I are always looking for heroes. And until a few months ago, I never heard of Jackie Cochran, the subject of today's episode. And I learned about her through my colleague, Angel Worth, or Angelica Worth, whichever one she prefers today. She wrote an excellent TOS piece on her,
Well, she's
and
such an
she's a fellow
angel, so I
pod.
think she's such a
Yeah, we'll call
little
her
angel.
Angel
We gotta
today.
call her angel,
Angels
right?
with
Right.
wings. She Angel
Yeah,
is
there you
with
go.
wings for today. So welcome to the program, Angel.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Angel. And so Jackie Cochran is the subject for today. What dates from 1906 to 1980, right? One of the great
Mhm.
aviators in American history. So
Yeah.
where do you want to begin, Angel? You're the expert here. You want to begin at the beginning?
Let's begin at the beginning. I like that plan. So Cochrane started out.
Bessie Lee Pittman, right? Bessie Lee Pittman, wasn't that her real
Yes,
name? That's
yes,
right.
she was born
Why would you
Bessie
want to
Pittman. That's
change it?
right.
Why would you want to change from Bessie Lee Pittman? I mean, right? I mean, that's outstanding. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean Bessie sounds like a cow to me. So,
No, it's Elsie. Elsie the border
Okay.
cow.
but she did get her last name from her first marriage, which she didn't talk about very much. It didn't end very well. Um, but she had a much longer lasting, much happier marriage with a man named Floyd Odlum later on in life. So she never took his name because she wanted to be her own
Mhm.
woman, and she'd already started running a business and doing all these other things by the time she married Floyd. But that's where she got her last name.
She
Mhm.
she was
She
married
married
when she was
young.
like 13 or
Yeah.
14, wasn't
It
she?
was
Right.
really
Hmm.
young, yeah. Her first marriage, which, like I said, didn't end very well, to Robert Cochran, I believe was his name. And she never talked about it. She wrote a whole autobiography, never mentioned him. Just wasn't
Mm.
something she wanted to bring forward into her life.
But they had a
Hmm.
child, didn't they?
And he passed away when he was 4 years old. And again, that
Oh,
was something that she didn't take forward into her life. Um,
that's very sad.
yeah, one of her biographers speculates that that's the main reason she kept the name Cochrane, is to stay close to her son. Um, but, but yeah,
Mm.
he died very
That's very
tragically. But
that's very
the
that's very sad.
it was very sad.
So
Yeah.
let's start with the cosmetics because she was the two things from the title of the episode. She was in cosmetics and she flew in the clouds, and
Right.
these are two distinct careers to have for anybody. We'll certainly talk
Yeah.
about her achievement as a woman, but one of the things, Angel, that appealed to me was she she was a person. She was a hero first and foremost, and then a woman secondly. And how about you address that as
Oh
Well,
yeah,
well, let
totally.
me
And
just say,
she
Wings to Beauty, Angel. That's
wings
a
to beauty.
terrific
That's a
name,
great
isn't
name.
it? Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
name. And let me ask you before you start. From what I understand, she was a very attractive woman. Is that right?
hmm Yeah, she was a beautiful woman, and she thought that it was very important that women take care of their appearances, and that she was doing all kinds of good in the world by working in beauty parlors and helping women look better and feel better about themselves, and then starting her cosmetics company. So that's really how she got started down that path. Was she wanted an out from the really harsh working conditions of her family or her foster family. There's some confusion about whether that was her foster family or her biological family. But regardless, she started at a very young age working in a cotton mill, uh, which was all fine and dandy until there was a strike. There was no money for months. And so to get out, she started working at a beauty parlor. And Jackie was before, first and foremost, she worked very, very hard, and she wanted to be the absolute best at everything she did. And so that started in the cotton mill, honestly. But she was really able to do something with it, working in these beauty parlors, where she worked her way up quite quickly and ended up owning co-owning a couple of beauty parlors for a while before she pivoted in her career, but eventually she did come back to beauty and starting Jacqueline Cochran Cosmetics, which she ran for almost 30 years.
And
But she
she,
used to annoy the press
yeah,
when she'd
go
come
ahead.
down from a flight, and she would fix her makeup and her hair before she'd let them take any pictures.
Like this one that we have right
Yeah,
here, right? She's made up.
you see,
She's
she's got
well,
lipstick on and everything.
beautified. Hmm.
Well,
Yeah,
she's a beautiful woman. Is no reason for the press to complain about that. Not rationally anyway. But
no, certainly
she
not.
yeah, right. She married well, didn't she? What was his name? Odlum
Floyd
was like
Osborne,
a
yeah, he was
wealthy
very well
Hollywood
off.
mogul, wasn't he? Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
he
he was a
helped.
business tycoon. Um,
And
And
he
he wanted to
I was
market
something.
her. He taught her about
Yeah,
marketing herself,
mhm.
and again, here is a value that he sees that he wants to share with the world, and she's the right person for that role. And knowing the poverty that she had in her youth, and so self-made to a high degree, but then she meets somebody who can, like you said, bring it to a next level, and then also pivot. So how about we switch over now to the aviation
Yeah,
side?
well,
What was
that's
the
actually a
initial
perfect.
appeal?
Yeah, so
Good.
Floyd was actually the first person who suggested she learn how to fly. So that's
Mm.
Oh, is
actually
that
a
right? Okay.
perfect transition. Yeah.
Okay.
He mentioned it the first night they met when they were talking about she wanted to start this business, and she's like, well, and this was right in the midst of the Great Depression. And so Floyd looked at her and said, Jackie, there's a depression on. If you want to really do something, you're gonna have to do more than be a traveling saleswoman, which is what she had done for a number of years. You're gonna have to get your pilot's license and fly. Um, and she
Yeah,
didn't act on.
let me ask you something here,
Yeah.
Angel, because
Mm,
by the time of the Depression, Amelia Earhart was already, a famous aviatrix. So
mhm.
maybe Floyd, what was his name, Odlum? Maybe Floyd Odlum was thinking, well, Amelia Earhart has pioneered this for women. You could do the same thing. You have the same kind of gumption and the
Hmm.
Amelia Earhart was attractive. You're beautiful. This whole thing could really it could get off the ground, right? It could fly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that definitely could have
so
been one of their inspirations.
she became friends with Amelia Earhart, didn't
She
she?
did, yeah. Not until after she started flying, but yeah. Um, so she started working. She met Floyd when she was working halfway between New York City and Miami. She was splitting her years, working for a top salon there. And it's funny how she got her job. It really speaks to her independence. And she went to the owner of a salon that was running out of the Ritz because she got to New York City and she said, "I'm going right to the top, right?" And the owner of the salon offered her the job on the condition that she cut her hair. And she said, "Look, I'm not going to cut my hair for you, even if you offered me your entire business for cutting my hair."
Mm.
I
And
love
so
it. I
he
love
changed his mind and offered her the job anyway, but she said, "No, I'm out," and went and worked for his competitor.
Hey, there you go.
Wow.
You don't mess with a woman's hair. That's the
Nope.
takeaway from this
There's
story.
a new O.
You know,
Henry story in that one, right?
yeah, yeah, for, for
Definitely.
sure. So
Yeah. So
when did Wings to Beauty get off the ground, if I could put it in those
I
terms?
think that was in the early 30s. Yeah, it would have been in
Because
the
it's a
early
great name.
30s. Yeah.
It's a great name for an aviatrix who owns a cosmetics company, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
she
and some of
flew
it,
all over the country marketing her business. Is that right?
she absolutely did. Yeah. And that helped a lot. Her early operations were split between different cities that she would fly between. She had an office in New York. She had a store in Chicago and a lab as well. And she started making some of her big contacts early on in Ohio and in California. So she really was across the whole country with this brand. But yeah, while she was working at
So
the salon, she took her vacation, and she made a bet with Floyd that she would get her pilot's license in 3 weeks. Because everyone told her, no way, you can't get your pilot's license that quickly. 17 days.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. What
That's all it
one
took her.
referent that I have from this book you and I talked about, called
Yeah.
"Fighting for Space,"
Mhm.
which mentions, covers. She's one of the main characters in the book. Says the first time she flew, the something with the engine crapped out, and she thought it was
Mhm.
the owner of the plane testing her, like to see
Yeah.
how she could maneuver. And
Oh,
she
jeez.
landed emergency landing successfully, and he was worried because he didn't do anything wrong.
He
He
didn't rig
he
it,
didn't
yeah.
he didn't rig the plane for her to do this emergency, but she did. She was calm. She
Mhm.
just perfect grace under pressure, and that showed her. And I think in your essay, was it 52 one year? She had like 52 emergency landings.
Yeah.
I mean, amazing, just amazing.
Yeah, that's another thing, yeah, is that she was at the very beginning of flying, and she really liked to push boundaries and test new designs for planes and test new fuels and things like that, which she did for the military, test new innovations in aviation medicine with different oxygen masks and things, and all of that was dangerous. Like you said, 52 emergency landings in 1 year at one point. But she loved it. She's a quote from her I've got up here is, "To live without risk for me would have been tantamount to death." So she found a great
Amazing.
thrill
Yeah.
in
Hmm.
all of that. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a heroine's motto or a motto for any hero. And by the way,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Angel, when you said, they told her she couldn't get a pilot's license in 3 weeks, and she did it in 17 days. It reminded me of a quote from Amelia Earhart, who said, "What was it? Never interrupt somebody doing something you said couldn't be done."
Hmm.
Something like that. So
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, well, Jackie Cochran lived up to that motto.
Hmm.
That's for sure.
Oh,
So let's
So
move
absolutely.
she,
on to
yeah,
both the 99s and then the WASP, just the trailblazing for women in aviation. Okay, you want to speak to that, those terms and her
Yeah,
role?
so the 99s was Amelia Earhart's group, because at the time there were
Hmm.
99 women pilots in the US. So that was something I'm not sure how much involvement Cochrane had with it. The Wasps was more of Jackie Cochran's achievement.
A
When I say
creation.
more of,
Hmm.
I mean it was her idea. She
Yeah.
pushed it all the way through politically. She was the director of it, and then she pushed for it to be militarized after it was done. So WASP stands for Women Air Force Service Pilots. And basically, her idea was inspired by what she saw in Britain. She wanted to help in World War II. And so they offered, why don't you go fly a bomber across the Atlantic to England because they need planes and we're going to lend them some of our planes. And the thinking was not only would it practically serve the purpose of delivering the bomber to England, but it would set a record. No woman had flown a bomber across the Atlantic before. And then
Hmm.
the publicity. She was
Hmm.
something of a celebrity, so getting this attention on helping with the war effort was useful. So once she was there, though, she didn't just sit around. She helped with the airport. Uh, gosh, I forget what it was called exactly. The ATA, which was the Brits program for women helping with non-combat flying duties, basically to free the men
Right.
up for combat. So they were doing a lot of ferrying,
Yep.
taking supplies, men, everything that needed to be moved from point A to point B so that the men would be free to fight, basically. And so
Hmm.
Cochrane helped with that, and she studied what they were doing so that she could submit a report when she got back to the US to set up the same thing in the US. And it started under a different name, but it eventually ended up being called the WASPs. And they together, the whole group, which was almost 1,000 women when all was said and done, uh, flew over 60 million miles for what was then the Army. The Air Force didn't exist yet as a separate entity. It was
Right.
part of the Army. Um, so
Hmm.
that was, she was
And
awarded
she
a
fought
Distinguished
for
Service.
them. Basically, she fought for them to get the benefits, to get
Yeah.
military acceptance, military title, because they were risk. They was
Yeah.
performing a needed function. There were not enough men, or the men were actually in the battles which
Hmm.
which the women were not allowed to. So one of the things that really appeals to me is she was a feminist in what I call the good sense of, she showed female empowerment, that women can do many things just as good as men. She was fiercely competitive, but she wasn't anti-male, which is kind of
No.
what the term today has amounted to. So you want to speak to that, Angel?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, in terms of proving that women could do what men could do, we think it's ridiculous today, the idea that a woman couldn't pilot a plane because she gets her period. But this was a serious concern in, the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
And so what her part of what she did with the WASP was to prove that that's not at all the case, that the same types of tests and training worked just as well for women pilots as they did for male pilots. Um, and that they had similar stamina and ability. They could run the same type of duties, and then when they did do the same duties as men, they had a similar fatality rate. And so another thing that they also did that was a little bit above and beyond is they would test planes that the male pilots didn't want to fly, and show that they were perfectly fine. Or if there was a problem, they would find the problem so it could be fixed.
You know, you know,
So,
Angel,
Why
you
wouldn't
reminded me.
men want to fly?
Hold on a second. Hold on. I just want to
Yeah.
say something. I think
Mhm.
they should send the women into combat, and let the men do the ferrying and stuff. Because when she, especially when she's PMS, she's going to be mean and angry and aggressive, right? And I mean, she could really, I think it'd really be, quite a weapon for the U.S. Air Force.
I
I'm
just
sorry.
give me a plane.
Well, I mean,
Angel, can
they
you?
should have thought of that. They should have thought of that in the 1940s, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you give an example of something that men would not want to do
Well, it's just specific
women?
planes that got bad reputations. If a pilot had an
Okay,
accident in it, they would regard the plane as a
I
killer,
see.
and so then they didn't want to fly it.
Right. Okay.
But
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
usually it
just
and
was.
there were some things. I think I'm sorry.
yeah. Go ahead.
There were some examples where like they had quicker reflexes and
Mhm.
they were more suited. First of all, size is a factor in a small. We could see
Yes.
in this picture, you can't be big, you can't be gigantic in planes. And same thing for the astronaut program later on, which we'll get to. So I think that was like a factor as well, where women are just, they're more naturally suited for, even if our brain doesn't go that way directly.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing was, as time wore on, it used to be the case that you needed a lot of muscle to fly a plane. So in that case, men were better
Yes.
suited, but that started to change. Um,
Yeah.
and so then that started to not be a factor anymore. You don't need a ton of muscle these days, or even back in the 50s or so, to fly a plane.
hmm
So,
hmm
um,
I wanted to say
yeah,
So,
a
yeah, go ahead.
serious point here. Uh, not the joking reference I made before, but you reminded me of Rosie the Riveter.
mm,
The women were ferrying to free the men for combat. Well, similarly in the factories, right? A lot of the women. Rosie the Riveter was a fictional character, but she symbolized a lot of the women who were working factory jobs now, so that men could be freed up to for combat. And
mhm.
that's what Jackie Cochran's program here, reminds me of. Very, she and a lot of American women, and I think in Britain too, very supportive of the war effort against Nazi Germany.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would say more that helped us win the war. I would
Mhm.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
say she
without a
was a
doubt. Yeah,
factor in the U.S. winning the war, and
Oh, definitely.
that enough qualifies her, right there. Hero show, check, check right there. So if we go after the war now, and now it's like she's older. Okay, 1905. It's interesting. Her dates almost parallel Ayn Rand's. Born one year
yeah.
after
I was
and
thinking
died
that this morning.
two
Yeah,
years. 2 years before, and I think of Dagny Saggart, who's flying a plane herself, all around in Atlas Shrugged. But let's go to some of her records now. Post-war,
Yeah,
she meets Chuck Yeager, another hero that was covered on the Hero Show,
yeah.
and
hmm
who had broken the sound barrier
with
in
broken ribs, by
1947.
the way.
Yep,
Right, with broken
with broken
ribs.
ribs. And the two of them hit it off. By the way, there's some good YouTube documentaries on her and some good footage of Yeager talking about Jackie Cochran, and some interviews with her in later years. So how about we talk about some of her records? Because as you say in your article, she died having more records than anybody in flight.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
and
she ended
Angel,
up.
she was known as the Speed Queen, wasn't she? Didn't they call her
Yes.
the Speed Queen?
Yeah. So that's one way in which her competitiveness didn't get in the way of her friendship with Amelia Earhart, because Earhart mostly went for distance, versus Jackie. Jackie mostly went for speed and altitude. And so
Hmm.
that's where she ended up training with Yeager, as you guys were saying, to do the supersonic flight. But she started setting records way earlier than that. She got her pilot's license in 1932 and started setting records in 1937. She won a
Hmm.
massive international race, the Bendix, in 1938. Um, and she participated in the Bendix a number of times, came in second once. Once she flew it without having flown that plane before, ever, because there were just too many problems in the manufacturing. She ended up injured during one of the Bendix races, but the point is, she was very eager to compete in these bigger races and not, as you were saying, Robert, in the smaller. She only entered one all women's race in her entire career, and that was only to qualify her for a bigger race. Because she wasn't
Hmm.
interested in women's records. Women's records were pretty much always beat by men in faster planes. And she didn't want to be the best among women. She wanted to be the best, period. Um, and so yeah, so it came to be that in 1953 she was the first woman to break the sound barrier. She broke a couple of other records that summer. Two of them were already broken like a year later, but she wasn't unhappy with that. She said that that's progress in the air and progress is necessary. So
Yeah. And now she's 47, 47, 48 years
mhm,
old,
yep.
breaking these records. So she's
Hmm.
still, her stamina, her joy of life is, it's not diminishing with age. It's
Oh
just
no,
going
not at
more
all.
and more. Hmm.
And didn't
Yeah.
she become Angel? Didn't she become the first woman to ever land and take off from an aircraft carrier?
Yes, I think that was one of her many records. Yeah.
I always marveled at that. The vastness of the ocean and the tiny deck
Yeah.
pitching and
Yeah.
rolling in the waves. The ability to
Yep.
land a plane on one of those things. You got to be a hell of a pilot. So, and I know,
Oh,
yeah, I know Jackie
absolutely.
Cochran. I know Jackie Cochran. That's one of
Hmm.
her accomplishments. Uh,
Hmm. She
but
also
she,
is
she,
the
she, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, she was the first woman to do a blind landing. They call it, where you're just relying on instruments. You're not looking at all. So that's another one of her records. In '62, when she was in her 50s, she set 9 international speed, distance, and altitude records. Um,
Hmm.
and then she was also the first woman to serve as president of the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale. Of course, French is not my
French.
second
Yeah.
language. Hmm.
That's
So,
okay. We do.
Yeah.
We still
So
love you,
actually,
Angel.
let's actually expand this more globally, because she was at the Nuremberg trials,
mhm,
I believe in Japan, one of the
she
first
was. Yep.
Americans to be post war Japan, and
Yep.
then France loved her, England loved her, Canada. So
Mhm.
just globally, a global star,
Mhm.
properly recognized by all these different countries.
Yeah,
Angel, let
absolutely.
me
So,
ask. Let me ask you. Let me. Go ahead. You want to respond to that? Then I have a question
oh,
for you.
I was just going to say how some of that came to be was after the war, or towards the end of the war, she didn't want to not be involved. She wanted to go see what was going on in Japan and the other parts of the world. So Floyd bought Liberty magazine, named her a war correspondent. Remember, she's had almost no formal schooling. She never went to high school. She did about 2 or 3 years of
Hmm.
schooling, which was pretty much enough for her to learn to read. And she cultivated a love of literature, but she couldn't spell for anything, much less write articles from a war zone. So her articles were basically useless. But she did end up helping the war correspondents in China get an extension of their special status so that they could get out on time. But the point is, before that, she was in Guam, she was in Japan, she went to Egypt and Israel and a number of other countries after the war, which led to more patriotism for her, actually. She
Right.
saw, and particularly in Soviet Russia, is nobody knew what was going on in Soviet Russia. We know now how much poverty there was then, but people didn't know that then. And so she
Well, they were
saw,
glorifying it. The
yeah,
American left sadly was glorifying it. So she went there and saw it with her own eyes.
yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
she saw what she saw with her own eyes was a couple of things that really struck her. She saw that everybody there worked hard and yet were still poor. And to her, that was the exact opposite of how things should be. She had worked hard and was now doing really well. And then she also saw the literal facades that they had set up in certain large cities there, where they literally had the front of a building that didn't have a back. It was like a movie set.
The
Um,
Potemkin Village model, right? The Potemkin
Mm-hmm.
Village.
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
so another quote from her is just, all that I had seen in my travels made me more aware of how precious what we have here in America is. We must keep it. Um,
Well, that
so yeah,
To
so that's
this
how she got
day,
some of her global.
true.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's excellent. Let me ask you this, Angel, because I mean, Jackie Cochran, she did all these extraordinary things. Like you
Mhm,
said, at her death, she held more. She no at her death, no pilot held more speed, distance, or altitude records. In the
mhm.
in the history of aviation, she helped spearhead well, she certainly contributed mightily to the war effort. She was a celebrity, and justly so, in her own lifetime. But like Robert said, today, she's largely forgotten.
Yeah.
Amelia Earhart's well known, but Jacqueline Cochran, no. When I took my daughter to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in D.C., which is great stuff, right? They have one of Amelia Earhart's planes, and Penny was young. I wanted her to see this, that we are women who are courageous, they can accomplish all these great things. Amelia Earhart is well known, and justly so. Why isn't Jackie Cochran more well known in our day? Do you think?
I really couldn't say unless it's just the added mystique of Earhart's untimely death. As sad as that is,
Yeah.
when there's that extra tragic element, I think that's kind of what cemented Earhart's status, which broke Jackie's heart, by the way, when she found out that her friend had gone
Mm-hmm.
missing. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm really
Yeah.
not sure why it is that Jackie Cochran just didn't get that everlasting status as a hero,
Well,
not just for women but across the board.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say people in
If one
aviation.
human, go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say people in aviation know her, but not the general public, because you don't think of, if you think of female aviatrixes, Andy, the word you like, it's only
I
one
love the
name.
word
It's only
aviatrix. Yeah,
right. It's only one name that comes to
Mhm.
mind. And but people in the industry, like I said, the Chuck Yeagers and the Doolittles, you mentioned earlier, Andy, about taking off of off of a ship. They know her, but sadly they're getting older and they're dying off. And here's a legend who should be in books that little girls read about, every day, saying, "Hey, this is something I can do." So, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah,
I interrupted you.
right. Yeah, and well, and you're right, and not just little girls, but also little boys too, because what
Yes,
one human
right.
being,
I don't mean to
yeah,
limit it.
yeah,
Mhm.
no, no, but one human being does extraordinary things, can inspire the rest of us. Doesn't have to be the same gender or the
Yeah,
same race or whatever. And
yeah,
Jackie Cochran is a extraordinary heroine. Well, Angel. You are doing your part in
yes,
resurrecting her memory and
yeah.
bringing her heroism to a much wider audience. So we certainly thank you for that. Um, so what I wanted to ask you from, especially she had the coolest nickname. She was the Speed Queen. I mean, today that might have other connotations, but still, the
Yeah.
Speed Queen. What do you think?
mhm.
Is there anything else we could do to introduce her to a whole new audience of people who don't know who she was? How do you resurrect a heroine who's been forgotten? That's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I mean, it's really comes down to everything that we've been doing of writing articles about her and putting this show together. Because when I was looking for materials, there aren't that many. I sent you guys the link to her autobiography because it's not in print anymore. Um, there's
Hmm.
another
Yeah.
version of, it's sort of a mixed. It took some of the material from her autobiography, and then added in some other material from later in her life and other records. Um, but even that I bought secondhand. So
You might have given yourself your own marching orders, Angel. There's a nice book for you to write.
there
The
we
true
go.
story, the true story of one of the great heroes of 20th century aviation.
Hmm. Although
Wings
I
to
will say,
beauty.
to give credit where it's due, I found out about her from a Facebook post and some, on this day in history type post that somebody had done, and her story caught my attention. So, and it's caught the attention of almost everybody I've told about her since then, because it's just an incredible
Hmm.
story.
Well,
Hmm.
maybe you should write a
So
full length
one
book
thing, if we,
right?
I was going to get, so going back to her life and her story, she had some influence politically. She knew
Mhm,
Eisenhower and encouraged him to run for president. She saved the
mhm,
life of LBJ
mhm,
back in 1948.
mhm.
Flew him to the Mayo Clinic, where he had kidney stones, I think, and was
Yes,
really
yes.
desperate, in desperate straits. And so she had some military, she had business, she had political,
Mhm,
uh, liberty, some journalism. War correspondent, by the way, reminds me of Churchill, because that's what he always considered himself. He didn't like the
mhm,
term journalist. He liked being called a war correspondent. And so really just a spectrum of activities that she excelled in. Again,
mhm.
America is the place to do that and not be held back. By contrast, where other countries, there would be more resistance. But again, she broke through these different barriers by opening things for women, by raising the bar for so many others to follow her. How about the space program? You want to talk a little bit about her influence there?
Yeah, the space program, she worked with, especially with Dr. Randy Lovelace, who she had worked with before. She helped him and his colleagues win an award in aviation for their contributions to creating an oxygen mask that aviators could use at high altitudes. So
Hmm.
she knew him. She had worked with him before, and they worked together to develop some testing for women pilots who wanted to be astronauts. But NASA was not interested. They were having none of it. And she didn't succeed in her lifetime in changing that,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, there was a big
So,
push. There was a side competition with the Russians for having
mhm,
the first female in space, and the Russians only did it for propaganda purposes.
yeah.
And the Americans would want a full program. They wouldn't. One of the things, one of the reasons she wasn't successful in convincing them was that they would want just a full program, not like a stunt to just put a woman up there. But
Right.
again, it's another trailblazing. Just the idea that might not come to us automatically, that this is something that anybody with competence, anybody with ability and passion, because these are things that she had and was able to work on. One of the things, now going back to her business as a businesswoman. Okay, so
Mhm,
she's already conquered so she had some business success, then aviation success, and then goes back to business, right? And even
mhm.
as Marilyn Monroe, right, wearing her lipstick, I think, in
Yeah,
one
yeah. Marilyn
campaign.
Monroe
So
wore her
it's a nice
lipstick and
it's
Jefferson
a
for her
nice full
blonde. Yeah.
circle there.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of overlap too. As Andy was saying, the Wings to Beauty name was marketing on that front, but it wasn't just marketing. Their top product was a moisturizer called Flowing Velvet, which she helped develop to keep her own skin soft while she was flying. So it wasn't all
Wow.
just stunts. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
You know
great.
what? You know
yeah.
what you reminded me of? You know, the life
Mm.
of Howard Hughes, minus the
Yeah,
mental illness that tormented that poor
yeah.
guy. But his
Future
success as a
hero
test
show
pilot.
subject, Andy,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
His success as a test pilot, as a Hollywood film
Mogul.
producer, as a
Mhm,
designer of aircraft, all this
mhm,
tremendous all around success. The poor guy suffered from from serious mental illness. We've discussed Martin Scorsese's film The Aviator on Howard Hughes, which we both like.
mhm,
Yeah, I
Hmm.
think Howard Hughes is a fitting topic for the future. But speaking of which,
But
Angel, I'm sorry, Rob. Did you want to say something before
No,
I ask Angel the question?
here's another subject who should be a featured film. I can just see a featured film of Jackie
That's what I was
Cochran.
going to say. That's
Where
what I was
is
going
it?
to say. That's
Go
what.
ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, Angel. That's what I think it'll take to to revitalize Jackie
Yeah.
Cochran's memory and her heroism. I mean, she was married to a Hollywood film mogul, right? Didn't he run
Hmm.
RKO Studios?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and Hollywood has that Marxist view today of the oppressor and the oppressed, and women are oppressed, of course, and at least
But she
a
was so
Marxist view.
anti-communist, Andy.
Yeah, that's true. And she would not. If she were here now, she'd probably, shake her feet. Don't you tell me I'm oppressed. I'm not oppressed. When I'm setting all these records, I'm not oppressed. I'm sorry, Jacqueline. But that's not your view. It's not my view. It is Hollywood's view. But you see, Robert's right. I see a feature film, Jessica Chastain, as Jacqueline Cochran. I mean, I could see it. I could see it. They made a good movie about Harriet Tubman, who was the real heroine.
Hmm.
Let's see a similar kind of movie about Jacqueline Cochran.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think that's what it takes. What do you think? You want to use Angel? You want to use your influence in Hollywood to kind of promote this?
What influence, Andy?
Oh, I figured a little devil like you probably had some influence, but I'm sorry, maybe I was wrong.
Was waiting for that.
But I
Um, no, but she was
well wait no
definitely.
wait no longer.
I want to hone in on what you said about she wouldn't have seen herself as oppressed. I've got a quote here from Shelley Midens, who was a World War II war correspondent for Life magazine, who spent some time with Jackie in the Philippines and Japan after the war. And she said, quote, she was someone who knew her own worth and took no nonsense. Certainly, she was a woman who would never have been stopped by the notion this is not something a woman ought to do, which just reminded
Right.
me so much of
Hmm.
Dagny Taggart.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and
Yeah.
Amelia Earhart, the two that
Hmm.
Yeah.
well, yeah, and uh, we did a hero show episode last year on Cecilia Payne, who I just commented on Facebook last night. Who, again, she went on to be one of the great scientists of the 20th century, and again, nobody knows who she was. But she was a girl growing up. Her mother said, you're not going to go to college." She didn't put any money, for her college, so she won Cecilia Payne won a scholarship to Cambridge, did all the work at Cambridge. They wouldn't give her the degree because she was a woman. So she crosses the pond and struggles at Harvard, not intellectually, but for them to give her the degree. She become because she's a woman. I think she was the first PhD in astronomy from Radcliffe. Anyway, she goes on to all these extraordinary things in science. And again, had a fight against this gender prejudice, but she didn't see. I'm going to do it. There's just this and I think the point here, and you can see why Jacqueline Cochran was anti-communist. Under the communists, you can't do this, but in a free
No.
country, you could fight against these social prejudices, and
Hmm.
and Jackie Cochran certainly did.
Hmm.
You think I can't do this because I'm a woman? Well, okay, open your eyes and watch, and I'll show you. She had that indomitable attitude, and yeah. I think. What do you think?
Hmm.
I think she'd be angry at me if I said you wanted the oppressed. You know.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, and to
Hmm.
continue on that, I've got a quote from her when she was reflecting back on her childhood, because she was 11 years old, 12 years old, working at the cotton mill, and she was telling all the other kids she wanted to be rich and travel the world when she grew up. Um, but she knew that wasn't going to happen by itself. So she said about herself, she wanted the nice things, it is true, but had no idea of getting them except through the expenditure of initiative and honest energy. This same girl thinks now, as she always has, that opportunity and incentive are the true heartbeats of happiness. They are kept by letting the other man hold on to the benefits of his enterprise and not by taking it away from him through a false will of the so called people spoken on the political platforms.
Hmm.
Speaking of
Nice.
political platforms, Angel, didn't she run for office once? Was it for Congress? Did she run for Congress? Was that in
Yep.
in uh, in California? I think.
Yes, yeah,
Hmm.
she and Floyd, so even though she started out in the Southeast and she met Floyd on the East Coast, they bought a ranch out in California. And so she ran for Congress from there, and she ultimately lost. She won the Republican nomination, but lost to the Democrat, because as it is today, the Democrats really control California. So that didn't work out for her. So
And that
even though
was
she
it.
did,
That was enough for her, right?
yep, yeah, it took such a toll
Never,
on
yeah,
her. She's like, that's not really what I want to be doing. So,
yeah,
Well, flying
yeah,
has a certain cleanliness to it. You're up in the air, and
yes,
it's you dealing with nature, and so it's very rational. Politics, dirty business. Even back then, probably it may not be as
mhm.
bad as it is today. But like, is that one of the reasons you think why Jackie Cochran didn't
Yeah.
pursue any further political career?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Definitely think so. The opposition mounted a whole smear campaign against her, which didn't,
Oh,
hmm
basically just
because she
saying
was a
that now that she's
woman.
wealthy, she can't connect to the common person, even though, she was poor growing up.
Oh, I see.
So,
Not because she was a woman, but because she was
not
wealthy
because
by
she
that
was a
time. Is
woman,
that why
no.
they? Yeah,
yeah.
they speared her
And it
because
was an
she was wealthy.
incumbent, right? I think it was an incumbent
Mm,
who
mhm,
defeated her, who had backing, and yeah. So that's unfortunate. But the earlier quote, one other point is the pro business. The earlier quote about, first of all, we know she's pro American and pro business, but also the taxation and the regulation angle. You want to speak to
mhm.
that as far as what, her as a businesswoman, a business person, seeing the value of gaining the fruit of their labor, from that
Mhm.
quote. Why don't you just speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, the quote sums up her views pretty nicely, I think. But as you were saying, Robert, she was very much against regulation and taxation, regulation of business. She thought that it strangled innovation, which it tends to do, certainly. And she also thought
Hmm.
that, I wish I had written it down, but the quote goes something to the effect of there's too much government in politics. Sorry, too much business in government. Government and business. There we go. Get it right. Too much government and
Yeah.
business, and not enough business in government. As in, the government is too involved in business, and not enough gets done at the political level. Um.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah. So that was.
Yeah.
Well, Angel, you reminded me that immortal quote from Milton Friedman, who said that if we put the government in charge of the Sahara in 5 years, there'd be a shortage of sand. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
some degree of hyperbole there, but Professor Friedman is certainly right about socialism and the inefficiency of
Hmm.
government running productive
Mhm.
industry. So I didn't realize Jackie Cochran. That's right. She was a lifelong Republican in her politics, wasn't she? And back
Mhm.
then, the Republicans, I think, had uh, more support of business than
Mhm.
they do today. But okay,
Yeah.
that's an interesting tidbit about
Yeah.
Jackie Cochran.
I want to do a little a little sidebar here, talking about OSI and what we're doing, Executive Standard Institute, because you're giving me an idea. We're considering doing short documentaries of
Mhm.
heroes, and now Jackie Cochran she's pushed to the front of the class because your article, Angel, this episode, other research that we can work on together,
Yeah,
the
Mhm.
three of
and she,
us,
and she
and
deserves she deserves
she
more
deserves this.
recognition
Yeah,
than she
she
gets
she
in
definitely
in our
deserves
day.
this. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. Another thing is what you mentioned, that she was big on innovation. Your podcast that you do with Tom, uh, Innovation Celebration. You know, you want to speak about that, and then we'll give Andy a chance to talk about his upcoming course in on literature in
Well, and,
that's coming
but
in November.
by the way, Angel, before you speak to that, I think you should rename the podcast "The Devil and Tom Walker." I think that would be a perfect title.
Craig would
Yeah.
be so unhappy that we went away from his rhyming name for us, but but no, on Innovation Celebration, my fiance Tom Walker and I talk about advancements in science and technology, the people and ideas that make them possible, and the ways in which they advance
Hmm.
human flourishing. And so, most
Hmm.
recently on there, I was able to interview economist Brian Kaplan on the subject of freedom and innovation. So, just like we were talking about before, regulation tends to strangle innovation. And so, Kaplan and I talked
Yeah,
about some specific instances of that overlap with his work. So, that's the type of thing we do over
great.
there.
Hmm.
Sounds
And
good.
Andy, your upcoming course on literature does not include The Devil and Tom Walker, right? That's a lesser known literature work of Washington Irving. But why don't you just mention what you're going to be talking
Right.
about in November?
That's correct. Yeah, the literature course that I'll be doing is focusing on short stories, yeah, that are little known, or in some cases yet unpublished, was soon to be published. So some great stories. It does include the Devil and Daniel Webster, very famous story, but that's actually the one story that's not lesser known, or it was
Yeah.
well known back in the day. It may be not as well known today
Yeah.
as it should be. But
Hmm.
Stephen Vincent Benet, great story. And then,
Hmm.
like you mentioned, Robert, The Devil and Tom Walker is a story by Washington Irving. I always like to tease Angel, that she's a little devil. That's why she's marrying a dude named Tom Walker. It's perfect. But
So
but anyhow,
all of this is on our website
Yes.
subjectivestandard.org slash
yeah, there's some
podcasts slash courses.
and there's some great. And I put it up on my Facebook page too. But there's some great material that's not widely known. The story named "Line Engine versus the Ants" by Carl Stevenson, which is a great
Hmm.
story. Most people today don't know what it was. The most dangerous game by Richard Connell was well known back in the day. Maybe it's still a little bit known, but not as much as it should be. Great story by Dorothy Canfield Fisher. Heyday of the Blood, which I don't think too many
Hmm.
people know about today. Some of Frank Spearman's stories that our good friend Fred Weiss had published, with Paper Tiger, and he
Hmm.
gave us permission to use
Yeah.
them. A couple of terrific railroad stories. About Frank Spearman, turn of the 20th century, wrote about a fictional version of what was the Northern Pacific Railroad. Edward H. Harriman's outfit, real
Yeah.
can-do guys. We did a hero
Yeah.
show episode on
Yeah.
Harriman. When Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, held up his
Oh
trades,
yeah.
Harriman didn't sit around and whine. He hired the toughest lawmen to hunt them to the ends of the earth, and they
Hmm.
chased them all the way down to Bolivia. That's real. That's real
Yep.
history. You don't mess. You
Wow.
don't.
So
You
these
don't. You
course
don't rob.
the,
Don't rob Harriman's train.
these oh, absolutely.
Spearman
Yeah.
stories.
So
Yes, Spearman
I'm sure
stories.
each one of your stories is going to have a hero in it, and
Oh yeah, Spearman
for the
stories are
hero show,
about.
that's what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. Frank Spearman stories about fictional version of the Northern Pacific
Hmm.
Railroad. And oh man, I mean these are can-do guys. These are the kind of guys Spearman wrote about, the kind of guys that Dagny Taggart would scour a continent for. These are landslides, avalanches, bridges are out. That's okay. We'll fix it. We'll make it work. We'll do it. These are really can do. These are super can do guys. Those two Spearman
Mhm.
stories are good, really good.
Yeah.
And then there's two of my stories from the Brooklyn stories, which is about to be released. The book should be out
Great.
within a month or so.
So
Some of
coming
some
back,
of
talking about Can Do and Jackie Cochran,
Yeah.
Angel, anything else? Any final thoughts? Any gems that we haven't covered about her that you think people should know about?
Yeah, I've got a few more quotes here I wanted to bring up, and one of them relates
Hmm.
perfectly to what you guys were just saying about that can-do spirit. Her husband Floyd about her said she considers a barrier only something to surmount, which I know you guys here on the Hero Show love the similar quote
Yes,
of obstacles are just things to overcome. So,
that's right.
uh,
Shackleton.
Shackleton,
That's
right?
right. Ernest
Hmm.
Shackleton. Correct.
yeah. And we've talked before about her how she pulled herself up by her bootstraps, and so her final thoughts on success are in every well blended recipe for success, you'll probably find honesty, determination, some skill and experience, as well as a lot of courage.
Great,
Sounds
Oh,
like Jackie
great.
Cochran was reading Poor Richard's Almanac. Was reading
Yeah,
maybe
right.
Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. Some of the
Yeah.
guys we covered on the Hero Show, Angel. Franklin was one. Frederick Douglass was
Yep.
another.
hmm
People who echoed that same sentiment. This
Yep.
is the way, you rise out of poverty by honesty, hard work. And
The
Jackie
Absolutely.
one
Cochran's
quote
another.
I have, Andy, exactly on that. She says, "I might have been born in a hovel, but I was determined to travel with the wind and the stars."
hmm
That
Wow.
is like from down here to up there. It's
Yeah.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah, because she started
Hmm.
her life in the sawmill camp. So the reason that my article name is in quotation marks is from Sawdust to Stardust. It's because I didn't come up with it. That's one that she wanted to use for her autobiography initially. She changed it to the
Amazing.
stars at
Hmm.
noon because that was like the most incredible thing she'd ever encountered. Is that if you fly enough high enough during the day, you see the stars. And she had done that on a number of occasions. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then the
Life in
last
the
quote I have,
clouds.
yeah,
Go
absolutely.
ahead.
Well,
The last quote I have for her is by the biographer of that book that I had held up before, Marianne Bucknam Brinley. And she says, Junkie never lost sight of her main objectives, living the good life and always aiming for the very top in any endeavor. Nor did she even begin to doubt that if she tried hard enough and fought hard enough and maneuvered hard enough, she would not only achieve what she most wanted, but could even affect the course of history and have one hell of a lot of fun doing it, as indeed she did.
huh, that's
Perfect.
excellent. Angel, when was that biography published? What year? What year was that?
Ooh, it was after her death. I will check for you
So that was
precisely.
that was that was
87,
that was night that
1987.
okay. So that's what 34 years ago. Well, so
Mm-hmm.
you take a few years to work on your version, and by the time your version comes out, it'll be almost 40 years. No, it's time. It's time for a new for reassessment of
Yeah,
Jacqueline Cochran's life,
I
right?
agree.
And real
You might be
Mm-hmm.
right, Andy.
and yeah, and then the Hollywood film with Jessica Chastain, Wings to Beauty. There's a nice to coin a title for it. This could be great. This could be great. I
Sure.
don't. I won't even ask for any. I won't even ask for any of the dividends or anything for putting forth these
How
for putting
generous
forth
of
these
you.
ideas. Yeah. Yes. Well. Yeah. It's what I do. But
Yeah.
but
So
anyhow,
yeah,
uh,
she wanted to live a very full life. She absolutely loved living a full life. And she also said, adventure is a state of mind and spirit. In truth, I ended up living a life of continuous adventure. So she is an inspiration, I think, to not only
Yes.
people who want to achieve great things, but people who want to live a full life and love their life.
Comes
absolutely.
back to philosophy for freedom and flourishing.
Which is what we do.
OSI's theme for every conference we do. Yeah, she just fits right in with that mindset. Mm-hmm.
And maybe at OSI next year, maybe you give a talk on Jacqueline Cochran.
I've been
Mm-hmm.
brainstorming ideas, Andy. I'm adding that to the list.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there you go. Like I
Nice.
said, I won't even ask for cut of the paycheck. But 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 anyhow, yeah, I'm nice that way, as Nick Fury said to Captain America. Uh, well, I think Angel, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I think you've certainly done
Yes,
a
thank
great
you.
job. Yeah, doing credit to Jacqueline Cochran, giving her the some at least a scintilla of the recognition that a great heroine like her deserves. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
we should salute Jackie Cochran, the life of a true heroine. And thank you, Angel. Hopefully, we can have you back on the show in the future to discuss other heroes and heroines.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to
Perfect.
wish everybody, to have a heroic day. To everybody, including us, to lead a more heroic
Yes.
life. And we will see you next week
We'll
on
see
the
you
Hero
next
Show.
week
Yeah,
on
see,
the
Thank you,
actually,
Hero
guys.
next
Show.
week is close. Next week, you're definitely welcome, Angel. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
And that reminds me, Robert, next week we're closing in on Halloween. So we're going to do a special version of the Villain
a
Show
villain.
next week, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
with
Yeah, a
spooky
scary
monster
villain.
music as well.
Yeah, a really scary villain. I won't tell you who it's going to be, but it's going to be somebody who's wreaked an enormous amount of
Yes,
havoc in
a
in
ghoul
American
of
education.
education. How
Yeah,
about
so I
that?
think you
Yeah.
could probably figure out. I think you could probably figure out who it is from that description. Anyhow, we'll see you next week on a special edition of the Villain Show, and then we'll be back with the Hero Show after that. So have a more heroic day, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye bye now.